Hello, welcome to the clase de gramática. Welcome to the Spanish grammar class. Welcome to exam revision. And what we are going to cover today is going to be a basic grammar for the Leaving Cert Spanish. Okay, so we are going to cover all the different tenses that you will need in order to be successful in the exam. So we are going to start with the present tense, and we're going to move on throughout all the tenses. So the present tense, let's highlight here with a different color, maybe with green. The present tense is the situation what's happening now, lo que pasa ahora, today, okay? And we have different types of verbs, and we always start with the regular verbs. So what are the regular verbs? The regular verbs are those verbs that they all are the same. They have the same pattern, and we add the same ending. So how do I form a regular verb? So I take the verb with the full verb with infinitive ending in ar, er, ir. I get rid of the ar, er, ir, and I add these endings. So all the verbs in Spanish belong to one of these three groups. The first group is the AR group, the second group is the ER group, and the third group is the IR group. So absolutely every single verb will belong to one of those groups. So let's imagine I have the verb hablar, to speak. I get rid of that AR, and because it's from the first group, if I want to say I speak, I just add the O. Hablo, which on its own means nothing. I have to add an ending. Hablo, I speak. You speak. Hablas, he or she speaks. Habla, and so on. So any verb that is regular would follow this pattern. If I talk about yo, I add an O, always an O. If it's you, AS. If it's AR, if it's ER, you have ES. Let's just cover the AR for the time being. If it's he or she or you polite, it's an A. We is amos. Vosotros, Is. For example, habláis. And they or you all polite, AN, hablan. Okay, so with the exception of the first one, when I'm talking about me, which is always the O, here I have an A all the way down because it's an AR verb from the first group. Okay, so the other two endings are going to be kind of mirror images, but because the main vowel is the E, I'm going to show that A for an E. So imagine we have the verb comer, to eat. I want to say I eat pizza, get rid of the ER and add an O. Como, comes, come, comemos, coméis, comen. If it's the verb to drink, beber is the same thing, swapping the ER for getting rid of the ER and adding these endings. Bebo, bebes, bebe, bebemos, bebéis, beben. The verb is IR. The third group of verbs is very similar to the second one. So it's kind of the same with the exception of these two. That should be instead of emos, imos, and instead of es, is. These are the only two that change. For example, vivir, vivo, vives, vive, vivimos, vivís, vive. So now any verb that is regular will behave this way. We will have all these endings. And the regular verbs are the ones that come up a lot in the exam. We have other examples here. Hablamos, como, vives, and you can see clearly the ending underlined, indicating the person. So what are the most important regular verbs? So we have them here, okay? You can see they're clearly organized in the first group, AR, second group, ER, and the third group, IR. So I'm going to go through all of them, and I'm going to give you the translations. There are verbs that have been taught, that have probably been learned since first year, so most of them will ring a bell. So we have amar, to love, bailar, to dance, buscar, to look for, to search, cantar, to sing, comprar, to buy, escuchar, to listen, esperar, to hope or to wait, estudiar, to study, hablar, to speak, to talk, llegar, to arrive, llevar, to carry something or to wear, like clothes or the school uniform. Make sure you don't mix them up, they're easily mixed up. Mirar, to look at, practicar, to practice, preparar, to prepare. Tocar could be to touch something, toco la mesa, or it could be a play an instrument, toco el piano. Tomar, to take, and trabajar, to work. So any of these verbs will follow that pattern. You get rid of the AR and add those endings. These are the most common, this is the most common group of group AR. Most of the verbs will belong to that group. Now we have the ER group. Aprender, to learn. Beber, to drink. Comer, to eat. Cometer, you can see in brackets there, un error, a mistake, to make a mistake. Or it could be in the context of cometer un crimen, to commit a crime. Everything depends on the context. Comprender, to understand. Correr, to run. Creer, to believe, to think. Deber, that's coming from the word deberes, homework, something you have to do, something you must do. Leer, to read. Meter, to put something in. Poseer, to own. Romper, to break. Temer, to be afraid of. And vender, to sell. So this would be the most common verbs below that are regulars and belong to the second group. Now the third group is not as common as the first group, and we have here some verbs that's most of them will actually be quite similar to the English one. Abrir, to open. Admitir, to admit. Cubrir, to cover. Decidir, to decide. Describir, to describe. Descubrir, to discover. Discutir, to have a disagreement. Escribir, to write. Existir, to exist. Permitir, to allow. Recibir, to receive. Subir, to go up or increase. Sufrir, to suffer. Unir, to join or link two things together. And vivir, to live. Vivo en doble. So these are the most important regular verbs in the present. Those verbs given there, they all behave the same way. They all add these endings here. Now, let's move on now to the next type of verbs, still in the present tense. They're called reflexive verbs, okay? So these ones are different from the other ones because they end in se. Literally the same thing, but they end in se. And they tend to be verbs that refer to your own body or describe your daily routine, okay? So what I have to do is I have to get that se and I have to get rid of it and move it to the front. And once I get rid of that se, what do I have left? A normal AR verb that I'm gonna deal with that AR verb as the ones before. So what do I do with that se? I change it according to the person. If it's me, I change it for me. If it's you, te. He or she, I don't change it. I just put it at the front, stays the same, se. We, nos. You all, us. And they stays the same as well. Once I dealt with that, I have to deal with the AR. I have to get rid of the AR and add the correct endings. So let's take, for example, the verb levantarse, to get up. In mine, I want to say, I get up. So I put that se at the front, me, and now we have this left, levantar. I follow the rules from the present verbs, get rid of the AR, and when I talk about me, I add a no. Me levanto, I get up. She gets up. So instead of the me, it's going to be se, levant, and the ending for she is an A. Se levanta, and so on. So these verbs normally refer to your daily routine or to your own body because it's kind of reflecting back on you. That se is the equivalent to English to myself. Okay? We can have a look at a few examples here. Llamarse, that's where the word me llamo, I am called, me llamo, comes from os laváis, te peinas. So basically here I have to take into account two things. The first one is what is called the reflexive pronouns, the bit with the se at the front changing it with the person. And the second thing is the ending, depending if it's ar, er, ir, and depending on the person. So now, what are the most common reflexive verbs? So we have them here with the translation into English. So I don't know what's going to come up in the exam, but what I want you to know is I'm going to show you the most important ones. As you can see, there will be verbs referring to your daily routine. Acostarse, to go to bed. Afeitarse, to shave. Bañarse, to have a bath. Cepillarse, to brush oneself. It could be your pelo, hair, could be los dientes, the teeth. Despertarse, to wake up. Dormirse, to fall asleep. Ducharse, to take a shower. Lavarse, to wash oneself. Levantarse, to stand up or get up in the mornings. Llamarse, to call oneself. Preocuparse por, that comes a lot in the dialogues. I'm going to do a star because that's a verb that tends to come up a lot in the dialogues. Probarse is to try on clothing. Sentarse and sentirse. Sentarse is to sit down. Sentirse is to feel. Make sure, because the only difference there is the vowel. And to get dressed. That will be useful if you're talking about the uniform in the oral, for example. Okay, so these verbs we have to take into account two things. The se at the end, that I'm going to move it to the front and change it according to the person, and the ending, depending if it's ar, er, ir, and depending on the person. As you can see, some of these verbs also have something like O to UE, E to IE. What is that? That's something we're going to cover in the next section. So how do these verbs can be asked in the exam? The oral examiner can ask you to describe your daily routine during the week, can ask you to describe your daily routine at weekends, or maybe your daily routine when we had the lockdown, and maybe you're in Spain, write a diary entry or a note describing your daily routine. So that these verbs could come up very easily in the exam. So now let's move on now to those verbs that are called radical changing verbs. So what is the radical of the verb? So we have a verb like, for example, volver, and we have the ER, which is the ending of the verb, and we have the bulb, the bit at the beginning is called the radical, the stem, the root of the verb, basically the most important part of the verb. But that on its own means nothing. I always have to add the endings. If it's the, for example, if it's the present and if it's me, I add an O to make some sense out of it. But what is special about these verbs? Not only you have to add the endings, some verbs, they go through a change in the radical. So I have to do something in the radical before I conjugate the verb, and they're normally called boot verbs. And you can see, have a look at the picture here. So there are mainly three groups: those verbs that have an O and changes to UE, those verbs that have an E that changes to IE, and those verbs that have an E and change to I. Let's take the O to UE as an example. So we have the verb poder, to be able. It's a very common verb. So now, if I'm going to put that in the present, but what I'm going to do is I am going to change the verb poder, the O changes to UE. In all the person, with the exception of two, which is we and you. So yo puedo, I change it to pued, and I add the O for me. Tú puedes, él o ella, usted puede. We can. We don't need to change the O to UE, it stays the same. You all can. We don't need to change it, stays the same. They can. Ustedes, you polite. Back to the change. So if you put them all in the shape, like if you cover them all like this is kind of the shape of a shoe, of a boot. That's why they are called boot verbs. So those people, those persons, like yo, tú, él, ella, ellos, that are inside the shoe will change. The one outside the shoe, we and you all, do not change. That's why they call boot verbs. This is only the example of O to UE. You could have E to IE and E to I. So that's the change I make in the radical, the stem of the root. And after that, I'll have to add the normal R, R, IR endings. So here I have to take into account two things: the change in the radical and the ending. And if you remember the picture of the shoe, that's a good idea for you to help you to remember. Okay, so here we have the changes O to UE, or if it's E, changes to IE, or if it's E to I. Here we have nosotros and vosotros, that doesn't change, and they, O to UE, E to IE, E to I. These are the changes. My advice is that you always think about the boot and the shoe, and that would help you to remember. So you're probably thinking, how do I know which verbs change, which ones they don't? Because we have a list here, okay? So I'm gonna go through the meaning of these verbs in the list. As you can see at the top, you have O to UE, E to IE, and E to I. So we're gonna start with the verbs that are AR verbs. And remember, all this is the present tense. So all these O's that you can see here in all those verbs are gonna change to UE. Remember, inside the shoe, outside the shoe. So maybe when I'm saying the verb, I'm gonna give you the first person singular, the yo form, with the verb conjugated. Almorzar, almuerzo, I have lunch. Aprobar, apruebo, I pass an exam. Contar, cuento, I count. Costar, cuesta, it costs, to cost money. Encontrar, encuentro, to find. Mostrar, muestro, to show. Probar, pruebo, to taste. Recordar, recuerdo, to remember. Sonar, suena, it makes a sound. Soñar con, sueño con, I dream about. Tostar, tuesto el pan, tuesto, I toast. Volar, vuelo, I fly. Now, these are the most common verbs that O is going to change to UE. Let's go to E to IE. If you have less verbs. Acertar, acierto, to get something right, to guess. Cerrar, cierro, to close. Comenzar, comienzo, to begin, to start. Confesar, confieso, to confess. Empezar, empiezo, to start. Fregar, friego, to wash, I do the washing up. To negar, niego, to deny. Pensar en, pienso en, to think about something. Temblar, to shiver. Tiemblo. Okay, and these are. And as you can see, there are no verbs that are in the AR, there are no verbs that change E to I. So now we're going to have a look at literally the same thing, but they're going to be ER verbs. And we have O to UE, E to IE, and there's none here. Devolver, devuelvo, I return. Morder, muerdo, I bite. Mover, muevo, I move. Poder, the one we sing as an example. Puedo, I can. Resolver, resuelvo, I resolve. Volver, vuelvo, I go back. Verbs E to IE, actually. Defender, defiendo, I defend. Encender, enciendo, I turn on. Entender, entiendo, I understand. Perder, pierdo, I lose. Querer, quiero, I want. And there is no verb here. So now let's go with the verbs that are IR. And here the most common ones would be these ones, the E to I. So dormir, duermo, I sleep. Morir, muero, or muere, to die. Advertir, advierto, to warn. Consentir, consiento, to allow. Convertir, convierto, to convert. Hervir, hiervo, to boil. Mentir, miento, to tell a lie. Preferir, prefiero, to prefer. Sentir, siento, to feel. Sugerir, sugiero, to suggest. Now let's go with the verbs E to I. Competir, compito, to compete. Conseguir, consigo, to get. Corregir, corrijo, to correct. Decir, digo, is actually also irregular in the form, to say. Despedir, despido, to say goodbye. Elegir, elijo, to to choose. Freír, frío, to fry. Impedir, impido, to avoid. Maldecir, maldigo, to swear. Medir, mido, to measure. Pedir, pido, to ask for. Reír, río, to laugh. Repetir, repito, to repeat. Seguir, sigo, to continue. And servir, sirvo, to serve. Okay, so this will be the most important verbs, the ones you really need to know for the exam. There's also one exception, which is the verb jugar. I'm sure that one rings a bell and you already know it, but it doesn't have an O, it has a U. So it's the only verb that changed the U to UE in the present tense. Things like juego al fútbol con mis amigos. Okay, another thing you can do is follow the 1, 2, 3, 6 pattern. So I could go here, I could number them 1, 2, 3, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these verbs here, and some of these verbs will follow the 1, 2, 3, 6 pattern. So that means the verbs that have a 1, a 2, and 3, and a 6 will change. Basically, the ones that are outside the boot, the 4 and 5, which is we and you all, they don't change. My advice is to learn these ones here because it's the ones you will need for the exam. Okay, we'll still continue with the present tense in Spanish. We have the irregular verbs in the first person, yo. And in the exam, most of the time you'll be talking about yourself. So it's very important that we know these verbs. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the verbs first. And after that, we can maybe have a look at the 3 rules. Okay? So these verbs will only be irregulars when I'm talking about me. So the first person, the you form, is irregular. And after that, they will go back to normal. For example, let's take a verb like hacer. Okay, hacer is to do or to make. So if it's irregular in the your first person, is hago, I do or make. And after that, goes back to normal. Haces, hace, hacemos, hacéis, hacen. So this verb is only irregular in the yo form. So what are the most important verbs here? So we have, for example, conducir, conduzco, conocer, conozco, hacer, hago, poner, pongo, saber, sé, salir, salgo, and ver, veo. But it's not really that irregular. You just have to, instead of getting rid of the ER, you just get rid of the R. Okay, so these are the verbs that you will need the most. Now, I want to make the difference. I want you to really know the difference between conocer, conozco, and saber, sé. In English, both of them translates as to know. Conocer, we use it in Spanish when we apply a person, conozco a Ana, or a place, conozco Madrid. When the verb saber is when you know a fact. Sé que en Irlanda llueve mucho. I know that island rains a lot. Or when you know a skill, I know how to swim. Sé nadar. Okay? Now, some people do not like to learn them as they are here. Some people prefer to memorize the rules. The good news about the rules is that it will apply to every single exception. So let's have a look at the rules. So now the verbs that end in cer and cir, this is literally the same as here. The verbs that end in cer and cir change the C to set C. Remember, only when I'm talking about me in the yo form. Look at like above, conocer, conozco, conducir, conduzco. Verbs that end in ger and gir change the G to J in the yo form. Escoger, escojo. After that, back to normal. Verbs that end in gir change the GU to G in the yo form. Seguir, sigo, conseguir, consigo. It doesn't matter if you learn the rules or if you learn the exceptions. As long as you learn them and you recognize them in the exam, you'll get the marks. Bien, now let's continue. We are almost finishing the present tense. It's a long one, the present tense, because it's full of exceptions. We're going to cover now the essential verbs, those verbs that you can't survive without them. They are very, very important. And you can see they have a few blanks here. Okay? So I'm going to fill in these blanks with you, and I'm going to tell you what's special about those verbs. So let's start with ser and estar. Ser and estar, both of them mean to be in English. So ser would be more permanent, things that they don't change, and estar would be more temporary, a location or a mood or a feeling. Okay, let's have a look at how we conjugate them. Ser, soy, eres, es, somos, sois, son. Estar, estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, están. So if I'm talking about the nationality, I would use I am Irish, soy irlandesa. But if I'm talking about location, I'm in Ireland today, but I might not be tomorrow. I might be in Spain tomorrow. You would say estoy en Irlanda. Even though in English, both of them translate as I am. So when we have these verbs, the verb to be in English, we have to stop for a second and think, is this implying something permanent or something temporary, something can change like a location or mood? And you apply ser or estar. Another important verb is hacer, to do or to make. Hago, haces, hace, hacemos, hacéis, hacen. Verb ir, to go. Voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, van. The verb tener and has this E on the line because changed to IE, with the exception of the first one. To have, tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen. Now, what's special about the verb tener? In Spanish, we use the verb tener to indicate possession, like in English. This is literally the same. Tengo un gato. I have a cat and the cat is mine. Tengo. The other one, we use it with age. Tengo 17 años. I am 17. In Spanish, you use the verb tener because it implies that you have them, you own them, and they belong to you. It's a sense of belonging with your age. And we also use tener with certain expressions when in English you used to be. Or in English, you would say, I am cold, I am hungry. And in Spanish, with these things translators, I have the cold in my bones. I have hunger. So we'd say, tengo frío. Tengo hambre. You kind of have them in your body. So now let's continue now with two essential verbs which are querer, that E is underlined, changes to IE, to want, quiero, quieres, quiere, queremos, queréis, quieren. And poder, that O changes to UE, can, being able, puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, podéis, pueden. Okay, so these are very important verbs, come up all the time in the exam, and we cannot go far if we don't know these verbs. Okay, so now what we have now here, still in the present tense, we have verbs of opinion. The verb gustar. These verbs are special because they are only used in the third person singular or plural. Here, the most important thing is the object that I'm talking about, not the person. So it's like here, look at the example. It's like the emphasis goes in the cat. I like the cat. The emphasis doesn't go on me, goes on the cat. Okay? So now, the most important verb here is gusta. Me gusta. Now, I use me gusta when I like something that is singular. Me gusta plus a singular noun. Me gusta, we can say, for example, me gusta la pizza. Pizza is singular. Or me gusta nadar. I like to do one thing, one action, to swim. But for example, me gustan, we use it when you like to talk about something that is plural. Me gustan las patatas fritas. I like chips. Chips is a word that is plural. It normally goes in the plural form. So that's why we have gustan. Okay? So we use gusta when it's something singular, and we use gustan when it's something plural. And that's all the time. So then how do I express, is me the one that likes the pizza, or is he or she? By changing this at the beginning. If it's me, me gusta. You, te gusta. He or she, le gusta. We like, nos gusta. You all like, os gusta. And they like, les gusta. Okay, so we have to be very careful. We don't mix up this with the reflexive verbs, which was the same with the exception of le. I'm going to do a star and les. Bien. So if I want to say she likes pizza, it's literally the same as me gusta la pizza, but swapping the le for the me for le. Le gusta la pizza. If I want to say we like chips, would swap me for nos. Nos gustan las patatas. So what is indicating the person is the me, te, le, nos, os, les. Okay, now we can also talk about emphasis. If I want to emphasize who is the one that likes the pizza, so we have something here called personal A, which is for emphasis, is to specify who's the one that likes something. So, and it's, you can see it's going to sound quite repetitive, but that's the whole point, emphasis. A mí me gusta la pizza. A ti te gusta la pizza. A él, a ella le gusta la pizza. A nosotros nos gusta la pizza. A vosotros os gusta la pizza. Y a ellos les gusta la pizza. Now, you can also mention the name. And this is something will come up in the dialogues. You have something like, a mi madre le gusta España. Is my mom the one that likes Spain? So if you are singling out a person, or a Paco le gusta el café. Paco likes coffee. Out of all of us, it's just Paco. So if you want to specify who the person is, we have to put that A. It's called personal A. This is very important for the dialogues. So which verbs follow this pattern? Like gustar. So we have a list here of the most important ones. Once again, we're going to highlight the ones you really, really need for the exam. Me encanta, me falta, me fascina, me gusta, me importa, y me interesa. Now, you have others here that I'm going to underline them maybe in a different color because they are not AR verbs, they are ER. Me parece y me duele, and doler, that O changes into UE. Because they are ER verbs, they don't have an A, like gusta or gustan. So therefore, I'm going to change that for me duele. Instead of writing an A, an E, or me duelen. Instead of writing AN, EN. Once again, for a plural thing or for a singular thing. These are mainly verbs of opinion, come up a lot in dialogues, diary entries, and you'll probably need them for your opinion pieces. And the last thing we're going to do about the present tense is the impersonal form of the verb haber, I. It's a very handy three-letter word, and it means in English, there is, there are, is there, and are there. In Spanish, we only have I. And I'm going to draw an I there. It's not a very good I, but I'm going to draw an I because that's how we pronounce it. We don't aspirate the H, we just ignore it. I. We pronounce it as I. So you could say, hay 5 personas en mi familia. There are 5 people in my family. Or you could say, hay un restaurante cerca. There is a restaurant near here. So it doesn't matter if it's singular or plural, we always have I. So that's everything you need to know about the present tense for the exam. That's anything you need to know about the exam for the present tense. Regular verbs, reflexive verbs, radical changing verbs, irregulars in the your form, essential verbs, verbs gustar, and others of opinion, and the verb haber. But what happens? We need other tenses in the exam. We also need the future tense, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. But it's not as long and complicated as the present tense. So in the future, it's a situation that will happen later or will happen tomorrow or is going to happen. Okay, so this was the present and this is where I have, this is the future tense. Okay, let me just get the pen here to highlight. Okay, so I normally divide it in two, the future one and the future two. I call the future one the simple future, the one you normally use for the union. You use for the union cert, I'm going to eat. And the future two is the one that you'd say, I will eat. So let's start with the easy one. This future has three parts. The verb ir, which we have to conjugate it. Voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, van. The next part is the a, voy a, and the next part is the infinitive. Is the full verb in the infinitive. So look at this. Voy a comer pizza el sábado. I'm going to eat pizza on Saturday. You have the verb ir, the a plus the infinitive. O voy a levantarme tarde mañana. What happens with the reflexives? I'm going to get up late tomorrow. So if the reflexive, if a verb is reflexive in the future, like levantarse, remember the reflexive had those verbs that end in se. So what do I do with them? I have two options. Or I link it to the verb at the infinitive here, or I put it at the beginning. Me voy. Hold on one second, they're together. Me voy a levantar. So the other thing we do is we put it at the very beginning and we get rid of it. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to get up. And that's how the future tense works. You'll be asked this in your oral exam. You'll be asked this in your diary entry note and dialogues. So this is the easy future. So now, what's the other future? The other future is when you need, I will do something, okay? So now, here, how do we form it? Here we have two types of verbs, the regular verbs and the irregular verbs. Let's start with the regulars. So the regular verbs, we are gonna keep the verb with infinitive, the whole verb with infinitive. We're not getting rid of anything, and we're gonna add these endings. And the good news is we have the same set of endings from the three groups, ar, er, ir. So now let's take a verb like comprar, to buy. And I want to say, I will buy a t-shirt next weekend. So the verb comprar, I don't get rid of the AR and I add the ending compraré. I will eat. Comer, I don't get rid of the ER, add E accent, comeré. So what are the endings? Comeré, comerás, comerá, comeremos, comeréis, comerán. And we have more examples. Cantaré, jugará, iréis, vivirán. So that's quite easy, straightforward for the regular verbs. Okay, but we have to move on now to the irregular verbs that still have these endings, but the root, the radical, the stem of the verb will change. So these are the irregular verbs in the future. We have the infinitive, the meaning in English, and how they change. Here, I only put the yo form, but they will change all the way down, okay? So now, we need to know these ones by heart. And what changes is the beginning, okay? So let me highlight first the important ones. Poner, pondré, salir, saldré, hacer, haré, poder, podré, tener, tendré, querer, querré. So let's take one example like salir. I will go out, my friends. So now, in theory, this verb, I keep the whole thing and add E accent. But this verb changes the root, the radical of the stem. Even though I'm going to add an E accent as an ending, this changes, develops a DR, saldre, and you add E accent, saldré. After that, all the way down, saldrás, saldrá, saldremos, saldréis, saldrán. Okay, so what is important here is that we change the bit, the radical changes, and the endings are the ones as the one we had seen before. So this is the future tense for you. Now, we have some time phrases that is useful to know them in order to build up sentences in any written structure. And there are words that come up an awful lot. Mañana, más tarde, la semana que viene, el mes que viene, el año que viene. Now, there is another word for que viene, which is próximo. Próximo also means next. Próximo mes, próxima semana. Esta tarde, esta noche, mañana por la mañana, mañana por la tarde, mañana por la noche. So you can use any of the futures, future 1 or future 2, and any of those time phrases. These time phrases could go at the very beginning of a sentence or at the very end. So I could say, más tarde haré los deberes. Later on, I'll do my homework, haré. Or I could say, haré los deberes más tarde. I'll do my homework later. So the time phrase, you can put it whatever. I recommend it to put it at the very beginning so it doesn't interfere with the rest of the sentence. Okay, so that's the future tense. Now, so let's move on now to the conditional tense, which is a tense very similar to the future. And it's like when in English we use uncertain, we want to express uncertainty, and we use would. I would do something. I would play outside if it wasn't rain. And this tense works very, very well along the, it follows the same lines as the future. So we also have the same irregulars and regular verbs. So now, the same as the future, we used to keep the full verb, and we keep the full verb with infinitive bit. We have the same set of endings as the other ones, and we add this. Ia, ia, ias, ia, íamos, íais, ían. Cantaría, I would sing. Jugaría, he or she would play. Iríais, vivirían. So any verb that is regular, you add those endings. Now, the irregular verbs are the same, exactly the same irregular verbs that in the future. So the endings will stay the same as the reg here. What we change is the beginning. So let's take the verb hacer. So we know that from the future used to change to haré. So here I get rid of the E accent because that's the ending for the future. And I change it for this one. Haría, I would do or make. And that's how the conditional tense works. Now, let's move on now to the preterite perfect. Okay, this is a compound tense. It's when in English you have something like, I have done, I have eaten. Okay, so we have two parts. This is a compound tense, okay? The first bit is the auxiliary verb haber, and the other one is the past participle. And what is the context of this? You can have a look here at the examples, but we use them when we are talking about finished actions in a time not finished. This morning I had breakfast at 8:30. I could be still talking at morning time because it's now 10 a.m. The morning is not finished, even though my breakfast is already finished. Finished actions that have been recently completed. I have just finished my homework. I have just finished it right now. Actions that have happened sometimes without an accuracy of time in your life and are still happening, are still true. I've been friends with Tom for the last 10 years and we're still friends. So it's something like this kind of refers to, kind of has a feeling of being in the past, but not as far in the past as something like I went or I did. So how do we form it? Let's start with the regular verbs. So the regular verbs here, we have two parts, the verb haber and the ado, ido, ado and ido. So what we do is we need the verb haber, which is the equivalent to in English, I have eaten, I have gone, I have. We have to make sure we don't translate that as tener. And this one is eaten. It's the second bit called past participle. So we really need to know the endings here. As, a, hemos, habéis, and. Those ones are the most important ones, the ones that come up a lot. And after that, the endings. If it's AR, you get rid of the AR and you add ado. If it's ER or IR, you get rid of that and you add ido. Let's have a look at a few examples. He cantado, ha bebido, habéis vivido, and ido. For example, the verb to go, what you do with the verb to go is you remove the ir and you add ido, and that's what I have gone to the cinema. I have gone, and you have the verb ir. Get rid of the ir and we have nothing left. It's okay, we can add ido. He ido al cine. Okay, but these are the regular verbs. Okay, so now we have also irregular verbs. So where is the verb irregular? This is going to be always the same. The irregular verb change here. So they don't add the ado and the ido. They have the special form in the past participle. We're going to have a look now. So now the verbs with the irregular participle are these ones, okay? So we have the infinitive, the irregular participle, and the English. Let's highlight the important ones to start with. Abrir, abierto. Decir, dicho. Describir, descrito. Escribir, escrito. Hacer, hecho. Ver, visto. Volver, vuelto. Let's take an example like, I have done my homework, okay? Straight away, I see two parts here. I have and done. I have is we don't pronounce the H, and the verb hacer. In theory, should be hacer, get rid of the ER and add ido. But we need to know that the verb hacer is always irregular. So that's not gonna work. So we have a look here at my list, and of course, hacer is here. And the regular for hacer is hecho. Okay, so that's the irregular, hecho. In the exam, especially that in the written section, these are the ones that will come up a lot. Now, we may have some compound verbs, compound words based on these roots of these verbs. So if you have a verb coming from this verb, like these ones here, they're going to be also irregular. Like componer, compuesto, deshacer, deshecho, oponer, opuesto, suponer, supuesto, and prever, previsto. So this is the compound tense. Okay, so maybe for next time we have left the preterite indefinido, the past tense. That will take a while to explain because it has full of exceptions. We're going to cover that in another video in detail. And that's everything from me for today. Just to remind you that where does the grammar come up in the Leaving Cert is throughout the paper, in the dialogues, diary entry, note, formal letter, opinion piece, in the comprehensions, and the oral. Okay, so thank you for listening to this video, watching this video, exam revision, Leaving Cert Spanish, and I'll see you soon. Gracias, hasta pronto.